Hello and welcome to Randomised Gaming, and yes, I am your host once again, Random Gamer Riven, for this video. Now today I've got a very different video to usual, as I actually want to talk about PC capturing and why we actually use Elgato capture cards to capture some of the older PC games. Although we haven't used them too much in our actual YouTube channel, it is actually a great capture card to capture devices. So as you can see there at the minute, I have a great Mise en Ambient effect going on, or the Drostel effect is also known, but I think the French word Mise en Ambient with the sort of windows and windows. That's because I'm currently previewing my capture screen. And the reason is, of course, you can actually capture your PC with your Elgato capture card. Now, we're currently using the Elgato HD Pro. And to do that, you actually, in order to capture your PC, you need a PC with a spare HDMI port. You might be able to do it with a DVMI device as well, but you may need an adapter for HDMI. Basically, what I'm doing is I've got one, my DVI port comes to my monitor, and I've got a second HDMI port in my card that I'm moving to the actual capture card. And as you can see there, I'm going to just disable the preview, so that way you don't see the Mise en Ambient. Apologies, but I've had to re-record this audio because originally when I recorded it, despite, as you can see there, setting it around 50, it was, the volume was just too high. So yeah, Elgato does actually have some great tutorials on the website, as you can see here. So if you just go back and put the URLs, I'll include the URLs in the comments below. There's actually two great sites for actually telling you how to capture your PC via the Elgato HD capture software. And provided your graphics card says it's got a spare HDMI port, it's pretty easy to do. Basically, what I'm then doing is running this to my capture card to the Elgato, and then my capture out via the bypass to my monitor as well, so that we can technically dual screen it as well via that method. So one of the reasons we actually use Elgato for capturing older PC games is it's actually a really nice bit of kit. And when I'm referring to older PC games, I'm not referring to Dosbox or titles that fall under Scum. As you'll see in a second, which I'll demonstrate, old PC games that fall under Dosbox are really well emulated via emulators like Dosbox and like ScummVM that really make playing a lot of the older games really easy. But where things fall down is Windows 95, 98 and XP games. A lot of them are very incompatible with the modern systems, particularly Windows 8 and Windows 10. Now that's one of the reasons we actually use Windows 7, as Windows 7 still has very decent compatibility with the older systems. And if you usually look around the net, there's usually problems for a lot of the more popular games. You'll find fans have made patches and fixes to actually get them to run. Sometimes there are just general programs you can use as well that will just tweak a few tweaks here and there. I mean, even Windows has a few default options that will enable you to play games that previously by default, if you just try to install them, don't work, but a few tweaks and twists, you can get them running with not too much effort. While granted, some are going to require some serious reprogramming that may be beyond most people, it's still nice to try and get a lot of these old games up and running. So as you can see here, I'm just highlighting Dosbox, which is a really great way of playing old DOS games. Now, I think one of the reasons people have shied away from Windows 95 emulation is possibly the Microsoft copyright, but DOS was also copyrighted by Microsoft itself. And as you can see, it does form a great little emulator, and by and large runs just about every DOS game ever made. There are one or two issues, but if you look, they've been working on it for so long, they've ironed out almost every bug. Again, there's ScummVM that's primarily designed for point-and-click games. Preferably, the thing was originally started for the LucasArts stuff, but it was really, really a great tool to get the LucasArts games to run. Now, having got most of them myself, some LucasArts games, the installers still run on Windows 7. Others, you really have to use something like ScummVM to get them running, because otherwise they're a bit of a nightmare. Because of ScummVM, you don't see too many fan fixes to a lot of the old point-and-click adventures because they don't need to do them. Now, one of the reasons we actually use Elgato is that capturing via Dosbox, Scum, and even something like MAME is really easy via a software like Open Broadcast software. If you try and use Open Broadcast on 95 and 98 games, Open Broadcast only works with DirectX 9 or above games, and as a result, it doesn't run particularly well on 95, 98 games because they don't support DirectX 9. In fact, basically, Open Broadcast runs anything below, won't run anything below, capture anything correctly below DirectX 9. So, as you can see, this is Dosbox, which I'm capturing with the Elgato. I'm just showing you how easy it is to actually play a Dosbox game. Incidentally, this is actually, I'm just showing you an installed version of Dark Forces, and I actually installed it from myself from my original disc, so this is not downloaded some pre-installed thing. I've actually installed it from the disc thanks to Dosbox, so I'm just going to use the mount command, etc. here to mount it. But as you can see, Dosbox itself is going to be a really easy way to play these older games. So yeah, the few mount commands. It does take a little bit of time to get used to the mount commands, but as you can see the top there, intro, help. Use them, they give you a really good rough line. I mean, I'm not that great on command lines myself, as you'll see my typing takes a little while, but I've used it enough now to know roughly how to install games and get them to run. And it runs, as you'll see, Dark Forces runs really well on Dosbox. Now, I could use Open Broadcast software as well to capture this, because Dosbox does use DirectX 9, and as a result is really easy to capture from. The Elgato, as it runs as a generic capture all, is even easier, I find, because you just literally tell the Elgato to capture your screen and away you go. There are a few quirks we've discovered with the Elgato, but I'll come to them later. While Open Broadcast technically is quicker to run from some aspects because it's using the direct capture software with how it captures directly from the hard source, I do find that because Open Broadcast doesn't support older DirectX, it does make some disappointing results on some of the other games. So this is Dark Forces, and I'll just leave you a quick bit of gameplay here to show you how well it runs. Aside from there's some V-syncing issues, I think perhaps I need to double check I've got V-sync set on Dosbox. Besides from that, it actually runs really well. Although I can't remember if some of the V-syncing was partly down to the fact I was running through the Elgato at this point. Because it had tweaked two capture setups. As you can see, all sound effects working, it's playing, and I'm actually playing from an original disc version of Dark Forces as well. It's not a downloaded version, I installed the disc. I actually originally was doing some disc swapping, but I've had to, that audio has been cut out as we lost the original audio. So there's Dark Forces, plays very well, plays very nicely. Dosbox is really easy to capture, and remember we're capturing with this whole video is captured by Elgato. So ScummVM. Now ScummVM actually has a few games have been kindly given to ScummVM via the developers, and Dreamweb is one of them. So you can actually go to ScummVM's website, download Scum, and then you can download Dreamweb as well, as developers have kindly given. It's actually a really good game. It would be nice to actually see newer port to some of the new consoles, because it's actually quite an interesting sense to the game. I'm just briefly showing you how easy it is to capture via Scum. As you can see, we're recording via the Elgato, and you're watching the end video result. Remember, all this video you're seeing is a capture from the Elgato. I'm going to show you some captures of OBS videos later, but we'll come to that when we get there. So that is old PC games using Scum and Thing, and they run very well and are captured very nicely. So as you can see, via Dosbox and ScummVM, we can get a lot of old games to run. But as I said, it's more the 95 and 98 games that present the more problems. Now, one thing you will notice is aspect ratio. And for games that support DirectX 9.0, one thing you do want to at least make sure is AMD card does support the drivers. And that's interesting, one thing I have to come to explain later. There are certain games that can no longer be played via DirectDaw because most graphics cards for NVIDIA and AMD cards now no longer support DirectX from about 7 or below. One thing you did see is the fact that I had in my Dosbox I had that set to 4:3. Now you have to fiddle around for the correct aspect ratio, but DOSBox does support 4:3 aspect ratio, and that has to be done internally via DOSBox itself in the actual config file rather than relying on your AMD card. For certain games like Diablo 2, which I'm about to show you in a second, you can adjust the resolution via AMD's own internal graphics settings in their Catalyst Control Center or their system settings. ScummVM's really quite difficult to get it to display at 4:3, and that relies on partly your AMD settings. I don't think ScummVMU, they've actually properly implemented 4:3, so you're kind of relying on your card, but even then it doesn't always work. So what we're going to go over next, I'm going to show you a couple of fixes for both Diablo 1 and 2. One, for Diablo 2, I'm going to show you how to correct the aspect ratio. For Diablo 1, which does install, I'm going to show you how to address the 256 color issue in a slightly unusual way, because usually it's batch files and shutting down Explorer, but there's a way you can get around it without doing any of them that you can use constantly, but I'll come to that in a second. So AMD, if you go into the control settings, you will see you have the options to config and work with the settings for the display drivers. Now, unfortunately, in the dry run, the settings worked fine, but I think because I was capturing via the Elgato, and during the Elgato capture, it didn't adjust the ratio. That's probably because the capture was actually active or locked in some sort of multiple display. But anyway, because of that, unfortunately, attempts to adjust the ratio back to widescreen, it stayed locked at 4:3, which in some ways is a good thing, but I just want to demonstrate the fact that by default, usually the AMD is not set to preserve aspect ratio, and it forces 4:3 games into widescreen, and you have to manually adjust these options in order to correctly put them back to 4:3. But as I said, my PC is already set up for 4:3, and when during this test, as I said, because it was capturing, I believe it wouldn't allow me to adjust the aspect ratio. So I'm going to bring up Diablo 2 first. And I should point out, Diablo 2 actually runs fine on Windows 7s, 8 and 10 PCs because Blizzard have actually recently been re-releasing patches for it in the past few weeks, in fact. And you can now, it now fully supports Windows 7, 8, 9, 10 without issue. Where Diablo 2 does have issues is the aspect ratio. So you'll see mine set to 4:3. Until about a month ago, it was set constantly in 16:9 because the AMD settings for graphics drivers did not correctly work to preserve aspect ratio. I wouldn't even be surprised if it was Blizzard that told AMD their settings weren't working. So basically, if you go to AMD settings, you will see the display and you'll see GPU scaling you want on. You want to select scaling mode, preserve aspect ratio, and that will give you a 4:3 aspect ratio. Now, if you, as I originally had planned to show in the video when I played with the modes, if you select full panel or center, it should stretch it into widescreen, which some people may want widescreen. I don't, because that's not the original aspect ratio the developers had, and it looks pretty ugly stretching a 4:3 game to 16:9. Unfortunately, for some reason, which I'm not too sure about, I think I said because although it ran in the dry run when basically it worked fine in the dry run when I wasn't capturing, but in the actual capture run, it didn't work correctly. I think this was due to me not having set up the drivers correctly. Well, I think me not having, basically, I think it's due to the fact I was capturing the Elgato drivers at this point, and I think it may have been on display device 1, not 2. But in short, if you want to play Diablo 2, by default, if your drivers are not set up correctly for that preserve aspect ratio, it will automatically stretch Diablo 2 into widescreen. So go into AMD and fix the settings. And as I mentioned, I've only been able to do this for the past month because until the most recent update to the AMD drivers, although those settings were in the AMD settings, they did not work under any circumstances. So next up is a quick few hints on getting Diablo 1 to run. Now, Diablo 1 itself actually runs pretty well and installs fairly easy. I also managed to install the expansion called Hellfire. The one problem I did have was with Hellfire Expand Patch, which I had to get an extracted version of the patch because the patch installer wouldn't run. But the main issue is the 256 color issue, which you usually require a batch file or something to run. But the first thing I'm going to show you, you'll notice my background is a clear jet black. And there's a reason for that, as this actually came back like this when it came from repair. Now, initially I thought nothing of it, and then I thought a few people said actually having a solid colour like black as your background does address a few colour issues and a few other issues. Now, I'm not sure what I'm going to show you needs a background, but if in doubt, set your background to a solid black colour. But what I'm about to show you is a really weird fix for the 256 colour issue. So basically, you can normally do it via ticking some of the boxes, but the problem with that is, or using a auto run batch, or shutting down Explorer. Now, both those issues are quite protracted, I should say, and the problem with the batch file is as soon as if you have to exit out the app for any reason, the colour then goes squiffy when you enter back in. Sometimes occasionally playing a game you need to nip out and nip back in. I've had that. This method I'm about to show you works perfectly and it's really weird. Incidentally, I was using my Diablo disc at this point and having to remember because I tried the expansion disc first and then had to insert the original disc because the expansion disc, you don't need it once you actually installed it. But basically, so the 256 colour issues, you'll see actually in a lot of games as well, that basically, as you see in the intro, there's some distortion in the colour. And the reason for this is basically that the 64-bit systems and 32-bit do not like the low-grade colour games that originally 256. Some sort of weird coding issue with the coding. So they should, in theory, not have an issue, but they do for some reason. So what you're going to see me do is basically bring up the screen resolution manager. So you can see here, this menu's fine. Some menus are fine, others are totally corrupted. So this is the game. I see select the character. Incidentally, again, you see now it's actually recording very nicely, the Elgato, so we've got full screen, it's all looking very nicely. And this is where the colour issue hits, so all the colours distorted. And it's looking pretty messy because of 256, so we've got a psychedelic colour palette. That basically, well, you don't really want to play like a game like this. So what you do is you bring up properties on the desktop, bring up the screen resolution panel and just minimise it and then go back into game. And voila, fixed. Now, unfortunately, the actual video editor is actually expanding the Diablo footage into 16:9 and not 4:3. And because this is going to be a 16:9 video, I can't do anything to fix it. I think it's something to do with the way the Elgato exports it, because it's actually, I think because partly the channels is being displayed at 4:3 and 16:9 within the video, and it appears certain video editors, like I'm using Shortcut here, but that appears to basically be stretching both the 4:3 footage and the 16:9 footage into 16:9 to match it for parity. So apologies there that Diablo is in widescreen, but the raw footage captured from the Elgato was in 4:3. So of course, seeing as I want to actually show you what the raw footage looks like, I've decided to actually do another capture of the raw footage, so that way you can see what the raw footage looks like. So straight after this footage, I'm then going to show you a capture of the raw footage while being played back at video, and you'll effectively it's a capture of a capture, and you'll be able to see the original 4:3 versions. The reason for this is because I believe the Elgato effectively nicely scales up the footage to match the highest resolution in the video. The downside is that it takes ages to export. This video took about 3 hours to export, and it was about an hour long, which is surprisingly slow for the Elgato because usually everything's really quick to export, even at 1080 frames, 60 frames a second, so as long as it's the same resolution in game. Whereas in this PC video, I was actually chopping and changing resolution, so Diablo would have been running at about 640, Diablo 2 was 12 something, and some of the other games are lower resolutions as well. Later on, the second and third part I actually covered Last Bronx and Mega Man, and they're both, I think, 640. Basically, they're not 19 they're not 1080p, 1920, 1080p. So basically, it appears that Elgato software does nicely scale up the videos, and hence why you're getting the full screen results, and not if you attempt to use OBS, which I'll show you some footage in the second part. If you attempt to use Open Broadcast software, it records it according to the original resolution, and you have to capture it via Windows, and basically get a teeny little window of gameplay that you then have to try and somehow scale up via other methods that doesn't look particularly nice when you do scale it up. Right, I hope you enjoyed the first part of this video. Its raw length was about 56 minutes, so I split it into a few parts to make it a bit more digestible. It also means I can split it up per game in the title and other things. So I hope you enjoy this first part, and please stay tuned for the second part.